There's a father who took his son to K2, believing decades of experience could beat fresh warnings from the guides who knew the mountain was ready to kill anytime and unexpectedly. From a scouting avalanche that nearly buried the rescue team to pushing alone through chest-deep snow when every other climber turned back. Here's how ignoring one simple warning ended with both of them buried under 400 meters of ice. As always, viewers' descriptions is advised. On July 23, 2013, Marty Schmidt arrived at K2 base camp in Pakistan with his 25-year-old son, Denali. Marty wasn't some weekend warrior with a GoPro and a dream. The guy had summited Everest twice. He'd climbed Makalu solo without oxygen. He had stood on top of Cho Oyu 3 times and also guided expeditions across every major peak that mattered. He'd spent roughly 20 years in the Air Force as a pararescue specialist, pulling pilots out of crashes in conditions most people wouldn't survive. When Sherpas talked about him, they used words like legend and undisputed climber with respect, because he was a man who understood mountains at a level most climbers never reach. Denali was named after the Alaska peak where his dad started climbing decades earlier. The kid grew up with sketchbooks and paint, an artist at heart who slowly traded canvas for ice axes. In 2011, father and son created a new climbing route on Denali and named it the Dad and Son route. You could feel the kind of relationship they had through the same ambition. Denali always looked at his father and saw someone who could read ice falls like poetry, who knew exactly when to push and when to turn back. He trusted him completely. But 2 weeks before they even started climbing K2, something happened that should have been a warning. A group of Iranian climbers got lost on nearby Broad Peak and died in the mountains, which made Marty and Denali spend days at high altitude trying to rescue them, hauling gear, burning energy, working alongside guys like Chris Warner and Mike Horn. Though the rescue failed, and all the Iranians died, and Marty and Denali showed up to K2 already exhausted, their bodies and minds drained before the real climb even started. The fact is, K2 isn't Everest. Everest has been turned into a guided tourist climb, where you can pay your way to the top if you've got enough money and can handle the altitude. K2 is different. Climbers call it the Savage Mountain. Historically, 1 in 4 people who try to summit die on the way up or down. Even with modern gear, the death rate sits around 1 in 10. The mountain doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care how many peaks you've climbed or how experienced you are. K2 kills legends just as easily as it kills beginners. The problems started before they left base camp. Marty packed his bag with camera equipment, planning to document their climb for a YouTube documentary. He loaded up on batteries, backup cameras, extra meals for filming shots. Sherpas told him the weight would burn through his oxygen faster. He waved them off, insisting he'd pace himself. When they asked why he wasn't bringing spare gloves, Marty said he'd climbed colder mountains and been fine. Denali's crampons didn't fit right from a rushed purchase in Kathmandu. One boot sat loose, the metal frame shifting with each step. The guides noticed immediately and offered to fix them. Marty laughed it off, saying they'd work fine once they were on the mountain. During a mandatory gear check, Marty tied a figure-8 knot wrong. A Sherpa had to redo it twice while Marty stood there filming a selfie video on his phone. Denali fumbled with his carabiners, dropping 2 in the dirt, struggling to rack them properly on his harness. Other climbers exchanged looks. They knew that these weren't the actions of a team ready for K2. Despicable the fact that Marty had been here before, both in 1992 and 2000. Both times he'd turned back at 8,350 meters, just short of the summit. He'd been chasing K2 for over 20 years. He told anyone who'd listened that this time felt different, that he and Denali were going to be the first father-son team to stand on top of the Savage Mountain together. The Sherpas felt uneasy from the start. These weren't inexperienced porters. They were men whose grandfathers had pioneered the routes, whose entire lives revolved around reading snow conditions and avalanche danger. When a veteran Sherpa pulled Marty aside and pointed to fresh avalanche debris sliding down the Abruzzi Spur, Marty nodded politely and changed the subject. The unease spread through base camp like a cold wind. On July 25th, 6 expedition teams gathered at Camp 2, sitting at 6,500 meters. Weather forecasts looked decent. Teams were talking about a summit push. Then the snow started falling, heavier than anyone expected. Wind picked up, whipping spindrift off the ridges above. To take good precautions, the lead Sherpas from multiple teams, Adrian Hayes' crew, the Swiss climbers, others, volunteered to scout the route up to Camp 3 at 7,300 meters. They'd check conditions and report back. What they found was a death trap. The higher they climbed, the worse it got. Snow swallowed them waist deep. Some sections went chest deep, suffocating powder with no solid base underneath. Every step burned massive energy in air that already had 1/3 the oxygen of sea level. Then, halfway up, unexpected happened. A massive snow slab, 20 meters wide, broke loose above them. Hundreds of tons of snow and ice came thundering down the slope. By sheer luck, the avalanche missed the group by an arm's length. Chunks of ice the size of cars shattered past them, close enough to feel the wind. This made the Sherpas descend fast back to Camp 2, with their faces showing something the other climbers hadn't seen before. Genuine fear. These were men who'd spent their entire lives on 8,000-meter peaks. They delivered their verdict in 2 words. Impossible. Can't go up now. The snow was unstable. The avalanche danger was extreme. Continuing higher was as good as suicide. One by one, the teams made the call. Adrian Hayes' multinational crew packed up and descended to base camp. The Swiss team, known for technical precision and conservative decision-making, turned around. Mike Horn, the legendary South African adventurer attempting a solo climb, pulled back. Chris Warner, the Australian climber who'd become close friends with Marty during the Broad Peak rescue, stayed at Camp 2 through the night, watching the snow continue to fall, then decided to retreat at first light. But Marty and Denali didn't leave. As the other teams descended, they stood outside his tent, crampons biting into the ice, oxygen masks hanging loose around his neck. He paced. Denali watched him, silent. The Sherpas pleaded with them. They explained that their grandfathers had climbed these routes, that they knew what unstable snow looked like, that this wasn't about being cautious or scared. This was about staying alive. Marty listened, though, but nodded, then said something that sealed their fate. "We haven't seen the conditions ourselves. We must check." He told Denali they'd climb to Camp 3, spend the night, and assess conditions in the morning. If it looked bad, they'd turn around. It was a calculated risk based on experience and confidence, but it was also something else. It was a man who'd spent 20 years chasing one mountain, who'd turned back twice before, who couldn't bear the thought of retreating again without at least trying. Chris Warner, who was his friend, would later say that Marty and Denali seemed to think the retreat was premature, that conditions were bad, but maybe not impossible. The Sherpas worried because they'd seen this before. Experienced climbers convincing themselves that skill and willpower could overcome what the mountain was screaming at them. Before dawn on July 26th, as the other teams descended to base camp, Marty and Denali roped up and started climbing alone toward Camp 3. The route to Camp 3 is brutal on a good day. That morning, it was something else. Fresh snow lay on top of hard blue ice, which is about the worst combination you can get. Every step, Marty and Denali punched down through soft powder, then hit slick ice underneath. Their boots sank to their thighs, sometimes higher. Pulling each leg back out felt like trying to walk through wet cement at 7,000 meters. The air was thin enough that just standing still left them breathing hard. Up here, your brain is running on a fraction of the oxygen it's used to. Thoughts slow down. Simple decisions feel complicated. Turning around, going back down to safety, starts to feel just as scary as going up. Hours passed like this. Step, sink, drag the leg up, axes into the slope. Try not to think about the avalanche that had missed the Sherpas by a few feet the day before. By late afternoon, they were wrecked. They'd burned a full day's energy to cover a distance that normally goes much faster in good conditions. Somewhere around 7,200 to 7,400 meters in the fading light, they finally stomped out a small platform and pitched their tent. The wind cut across the slope, carrying loose snow like sand across a beach. Inside, they fired up the stove, melted snow, and crawled into their sleeping bags, boots, and crampons left outside, ice axes planted in the snow for the morning. That night, Marty radioed base camp with what would be his last message. Made Camp 3, tired from snow effort, but solid, decide tomorrow. The words said a lot. They were exhausted, but in his mind, they'd proven something. Everyone else had turned back. Father and son were the only team to reach Camp 3. From that tiny tent, buried in the noise of the wind, it probably felt like a small victory. Tomorrow they'd look at the slope above and decide if they were going for the summit or heading down. What they didn't know was that the real danger wasn't up above the bottleneck yet. It was hanging over them while they slept. Higher on the mountain, a massive slab of snow sat perched above their camp. In the daylight, weak sunshine had warmed the top layers just enough to loosen the bonds holding everything together. When temperatures dropped again at night, the freeze-thaw cycle turned the slope into a loaded trap. No one in that tent could see it. They had no way to know that the exact spot they'd chosen after a day that nearly broke them was directly in the path of a future avalanche. The next morning, there was no radio call. Base camp waited for that simple check-in. Nothing came. Hours went by, people tried to give it time. Radios fail, batteries die. Sometimes climbers sleep a little longer after a brutal push. But as the day went on and the silence stayed, the mood shifted. The Sherpas, the same ones who had called the route impossible 2 days earlier, understood what that silence usually meant on K2. 2 of them still tied in and started climbing toward Camp 3. That decision alone says everything about who these men were. They had already watched a 20-meter-wide avalanche nearly wipe out their scouting team. They knew the snowpack was unstable. They knew more slides were likely. But they also knew Marty and Denali were somewhere above them, and no one wanted to accept that they might already be gone. So they went back into the same terrain they'd just declared too dangerous for a summit push. This time, not for glory, not for a summit photo, but simply to find out what had happened. The climb up took hours. The Sherpas moved carefully, feeling the snow under their feet, reading every crack and hollow spot for signs of another slab waiting to break. By the time they reached the height where Camp 3 should have been, the answer was obvious. The tent was gone. The camp was gone. In its place, the slope looked eerily smooth, as if someone had taken a giant hand and wiped it clean. A scar of avalanche debris, roughly 400 meters wide, cut across the face. There were only 2 things standing out of the snow: Marty's crampons and his ice axes. Both were upright, planted in the snow where he'd left them before crawling into the tent. That detail hit hard. It meant he'd gone to bed fully expecting to wake up, put his boots on, strap into those crampons, grab those tools, and start climbing again. Whatever hit them during the night came fast. The slab above finally let go, and hundreds of tons of snow and ice roared down over their tent. At that speed and weight, there's no warning, no time to scramble out, no chance to dig yourself free. It was over in seconds. The Sherpas stood there in the thin air, staring at the empty slope where a tent should have been. No bodies, no gear, just buried. 2 climbers they respected, a father many of them had worked with for years, and his son who had grown into a strong mountaineer, now entombed somewhere under the avalanche path. One of the Sherpas later told people at base camp that he'd never forget the sight of those crampons and axes standing there like gravestones in the snow. When word reached base camp, the hope that they were just delayed or sleeping vanished. From there, the news spread out of the Karakoram and into the rest of the world. Back home, Marty's daughter Sequoia went online and posted the message nobody ever wants to write, confirming her father and brother were gone and that their spirits would rest at K2. Sponsors, friends, fellow climbers, all of them had known the risks on that mountain. Still, it felt unreal that a man with Marty's experience could die this way, in a tent, in his sleep, after ignoring one clear warning from the very people hired to keep teams alive. In the end, that's what makes this story so heavy. It wasn't a rookie mistake from someone who didn't understand the mountain. It wasn't a freak accident that came out of nowhere. The Sherpas had literally watched an avalanche miss them by a few feet and came back to camp saying, "Impossible, can't go up now." Every other team heard that, looked at the conditions, and went down. Marty and Denali chose to go up anyway, convinced their experience, their bond, and their history with big peaks were enough to thread a needle through a closing window. K2 didn't care. Up there, it never does. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.